We don't talk about it that often. We don't talk about what systemic change means. And systemic change, to me, means paradox. It means living with paradox. And it's something that characterizes our time, and it characterizes our lives and our work. Personally, professionally, it characterizes our organizations. Paradoxes are part of our daily life, and we're not used to that. So what we try and do when confronted with paradox is we try and solve the problem. And we try and solve the problem through the way we're taught to solve problems, which is by going to war against problems. And I refer to this as the paradigm of war. So what do? We look for our heroes, we marshal our resources, we get on our horses and we go to war against these problems. And we have the war against AIDS, the war against drugs. And it's a particular way of looking at problems, and it's a particular way of solving problems. And it doesn't work when confronted with paradox. And what Pioneers of Change to me is about is looking at those paradoxes and trying to deal with them and cope with them through a different paradigm, through a different set of skills. And those set of skills are cultivation. They're centered around the notion of cultivation and the notion of paying attention to details, to context. And all this is contrary to the paradigm of war. The paradigm of cultivation, I guess the easiest way of visualizing it is to think about dealing with a situation that requires commitment over a long period of time. So, for example, raising a child. And there's this interesting phrase, tribal memory. It's almost as if we have no tribal memory anymore. We have no memory between generations. And I think what Pioneers of Change is trying to do is create a memory in some ways amongst our own peers, so that the lessons that someone learns in India are not disconnected from the lessons that I might need to know or learn in London. And it isn't as if those learnings can be transplanted, but really, we talk about inspiration, but also those stories provide us with a point of departure. Those learnings give us a point of departure from which to experiment from which to learn from. And I think that's missing. That's missing in a lot of what we see around us today. One of the disconnects that exists within our society today is between thinkers and doers. So people who work for think tanks and academia do the thinking, and people who are activists or work for the business community do the, quote, acting. And one of the problems with that is that separation of domains is again a very artificial separation that doesn't really work nowadays. So what Pioneers of Change is doing is dissolving the barriers between those two domains. So when someone says I act, my work is with action, I'm a doer. Obviously they don't mean that they don't think. They do think, but they've handed over that part to some other professional. Now what we're trying to do is bring those two together and really blur the lines between action and reflection and make those more tightly bound together, which is something new, I think. So within Pioneers of Change, what we talk about cultivation as a paradigm, an alternative paradigm for problem solving. And in some ways it's not even problem solving, it's being able to hold paradox, be comfortable with paradox, be able to look at paradox without thinking that something has gone wrong here, something is fundamentally wrong, but rather just to cope with contradictory information that is all around us today.